She's been nothing but a disappointment her entire life. The words didn't just echo, they landed like gunfire in the Veterans Hall. Plates froze in midair. A child's laugh died in the corner. Even the lazy ceiling fan seemed to drag slower, as if the room itself had stopped to listen. My father's voice didn't need volume. It carried the way authority always had for him. Calm, practiced, sharpened by decades of command. He wasn't offering advice. He wasn't correcting me. No, he was branding me. And he did it in front of everyone. Neighbors, childhood friends, the men who had once followed his orders overseas, the women who baked pies for every town gathering. Every single pair of eyes turned my way. But my father wasn't done. He set his heavy hand on the shoulder of a younger man, tall, broad-chested, the gleam of fresh metals across his uniform. A soldier people instantly respected without knowing his name. This, my father declared, pride swelling in his chest, is the child I always wanted, the son who never let me down. The crowd approved with murmurs and nods. Their admiration shifted to him, to Daniel Rhodes, a decorated soldier, my father's so-called protégé. And just like that, respect drained away from me, as though I had never existed at all. But then, Daniel's eyes found mine. His steady confidence faltered, his jaw tightened, and in a voice low enough to sound private but sharp enough for every ear nearby to catch, he whispered just one word: Raven. The room shifted. Veterans straightened in their folding chairs. Younger men stiffened. A few gasps rippled quietly through the crowd. My father's smile froze, confusion flashing across his face. He didn't understand the weight of what had just been spoken, but others did. They recognized the name. The air grew heavy. Whispers swirled around me. Every eye turned toward me, not with pity anymore, but with something else: suspicion, respect, fear. And in that moment, standing under the fluorescent lights of that small town hall, I felt it. The story I had kept buried, the name I had hidden, was about to drag itself into the open. The silence wasn't protecting him anymore. It was circling me.
The room fell into complete silence. My sister-in-law stood frozen, her face pale as the whispers grew louder around the guests. She never expected her cruel words to come back to haunt her so quickly. My son, standing tall beside his new wife, looked at her with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "You called my father poor," he said slowly, his voice firm. "But this man gave me everything. Not money, not wealth, but strength, discipline, and love. He taught me how to stand on my own 2 feet. And if you think a man's worth is measured only in dollars, then maybe you don't belong in this family." Gasps filled the room. My daughter-in-law tried to speak, but my son raised his hand, silencing her. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. For years, I had carried the weight of that $53 million secret, not because I didn't trust my family, but because I wanted them to love me for me, not for the fortune attached to my name. Then, with everyone watching, I finally spoke. My voice shook at first, but then grew stronger. "I never cared about titles or showing off wealth," I said, looking directly at her. "But today you pushed me too far." I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a certified letter from the bank, proof of my inheritance. The hush grew heavier as I placed it on the table in front of her. This, I continued, is what you thought I never had. $53 million. I kept it hidden because I wanted my son to know the value of hard work, not the easy path of money. But you mocked me for being poor. The entire hall erupted into stunned murmurs. My daughter-in-law's eyes widened, her mouth opening but no words coming out. My son clenched his jaw, his disappointment radiating through the room. At that moment, everyone could see it clearly. This marriage had already cracked before it even began. The silence in the hall was deafening. You could almost hear the clock ticking on the wall. Every guest's eyes darted between me, my son, and his new bride. Some leaned forward in their chairs, others exchanged hushed whispers, their faces painted with disbelief. My daughter-in-law's hands shook as she clutched her bouquet tighter. Her voice cracked as she tried to laugh it off. 53 million? No one hides money like that. This is ridiculous. He's just trying to humiliate me. But her laughter died quickly. The envelope on the table was no ordinary piece of paper. It carried weight, truth, and authority. A few curious relatives peeked closer, recognizing the seal, and their gasps rippled through the crowd like waves. My son's expression hardened. He wasn't just angry, he was broken. His eyes, once filled with pride for his new bride, now carried something far heavier. "You didn't see the man who sacrificed for me," he said slowly, his voice trembling with controlled rage. "You only saw what he wore, what he drove, not the values he gave me. You saw less when all along he was more than anyone I've ever known." She reached for his arm, desperate, whispering his name, but he pulled back sharply, the rejection as loud as a thunderclap in the silence of the hall. Gasps echoed. Some guests shook their heads in disapproval, while others looked away embarrassed for her. An older uncle stood up, his voice trembling with fury. "You insulted the very man who gave this family its strength. You mocked a father at his own son's wedding. How could you?" Her family sat frozen, shifting uneasily, their eyes darting toward the exits as if they wished the floor would swallow them whole. The weight of shame hung heavy in the air. I looked at my son, and for a moment I saw the boy he once was, the little boy who used to hold my hand, who trusted me completely. Now he stood as a man, torn between the vows he had just made and the truth staring him in the face. And then a chilling realization swept over the room. This wedding wasn't just hanging by a thread, it was already unraveling. But the question burning in every guest's mind was the same. Would he forgive her, or would he end it all right here in front of everyone? The hall felt suspended in time. Every single eye was locked on my son, waiting for him to speak, waiting for the words that would decide the fate of the wedding and reveal the truth about the man who had shaped him. My daughter-in-law's face had turned pale, her hands trembling as she gripped the bouquet. She opened her mouth, tried to form a sentence, but it faltered in the air. Every second she hesitated made her guilt heavier, visible to everyone. He stepped forward slowly, measured, deliberate. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and the sound seemed deafening in the thick silence. "I trusted you," he began, voice calm but cutting through the room like a razor. "I believed in us, but love without respect is nothing. And mocking a man who gave me my life, that is unforgivable." A shiver passed through the guests. The murmurs died. The ceiling fans spun lazily above, slicing through the tense, heavy air. It wasn't just words. This was a verdict. She reached out, desperate, whispering his name. But he didn't flinch. He didn't need to yell. The stillness itself carried authority. "You called my father poor. You measured a man's worth by dollars and possessions, not by courage, sacrifice, and integrity. And today, you showed who you truly are." The hall seemed to tilt under the weight of his words. Guests leaned forward, some whispering in shock, others frozen, staring at the unfolding drama. My daughter-in-law's family shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes darting to the exits. Then came the moment. He stepped back, not angrily, not violently, but with a deliberate calm that carried more power than any shout ever could. His decision was clear. This marriage would not proceed. The silence that followed was electric. People weren't cheering, they were witnessing justice being done. Every gaze measured the shift in power. Respect, once assumed for her, drained away. Integrity now commanded the room. I watched him turn toward me for a fraction of a second. No words passed, but the nod he gave was enough. The nod said, "I see you. I honor you. I choose what is right." Even my father, who had once mocked me so publicly, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The arrogance that had defined him for decades melted, replaced with something smaller, almost human. For the first time, the authority of that room belonged not to him, but to truth. The envelope remained on the table, my $53 million inheritance. It had lost its power. Tonight, the real wealth was respect, integrity, and justice. And for the first time, I felt that weight settle gently, finally, on my shoulders. The crowd remained silent, yet the silence was profound. No applause was needed, no cheers. The weight of truth, of justice served, filled the room more powerfully than any celebration ever could. And in that silence, I realized something essential. Some victories aren't loud. They aren't celebrated with claps or fanfare. They are felt in the way eyes shift, in the way hearts acknowledge truth, and in the quiet understanding that some wrongs cannot stand when courage and integrity prevail. That night, the story of our family changed, not because of money, not because of ceremony, but because one man chose honor over convenience. And in that choice, he gave everyone present a lesson they would never forget. The house I grew up in was small, wooden, and smelled of black coffee and shoe polish. That scent still lingers in my memory, tied to a man whose authority filled every corner of the home, my father. From the age of 8, I learned that nothing in our house was accidental. Every shoe had a place, every sheet a perfect fold. He would line me up in the kitchen, heels together, shoulders back, eyes forward. "Don't blink," he'd command, watching me until my lashes burned. Mistakes weren't tolerated, not in my grades, not in my chores, not in the way I carried myself. Even the smallest imperfection earned a lecture so sharp it left an invisible scar. Yet, beneath that steel discipline, my mother existed like a quiet sun, warming the cracks in my life. She would slip notes into my lunch, lines of poetry or small reminders. "You are stronger than you think," or "You'll rise above." I remember the first time I brought home a track ribbon. His words didn't praise. They barely acknowledged it. "Don't get smug," he said flatly. But the smile on my mother's face told me she knew. She knew that within me was a spark that discipline alone couldn't extinguish. At 17, I applied to the Naval Academy. I left the application on the kitchen table, fresh with the smell of ink and anticipation. My father found it first. He ripped it, tore it into pieces, and discarded it as if it were a lesson in obedience. I remember staring at the floor,
feeling the weight of his disappointment settle like stones on my chest. But my mother had already made a copy. Quietly, behind my father's back, she mailed it in. Months later, the acceptance letter arrived. I held it in my hands, the paper trembling, heart pounding. This was my first taste of victory, earned in silence, in shadows, without his approval. Even then, I understood something fundamental. The distance between my father and me was not just about gender or expectations. It was about recognition, respect, and proving worth in a world that valued appearances over truth. The lessons he taught were harsh, but they were also a blueprint. Every drill, every critique, every cold word prepared me for a life where survival depended on precision, awareness, and patience. And somewhere in that house, in that small, sunlit kitchen, I learned that some victories are not shouted. They are quietly won, step by careful step, against those who doubt you the most. The first morning at the Naval Academy smelled of chlorine and cut grass. The sun rolls over the Pacific like it was watching, unblinking, as if judging every step we took. My hair had been shorn, my voice trained into sharp responses. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Precision was survival. The training was brutal. Logs heavier than my body, endless drills, the sound of boots against wood echoing like gunfire. At first, I struggled to keep pace, falling behind the others, but I reminded myself this wasn't about fitting in. It was about proving I could endure, adapt, and overcome. Every detail mattered. The shift in a voice-over radio, the silence before a gunshot, the subtle signs that danger was near. These were the things most people overlooked. I trained to see them all, to anticipate, to protect. That's how I earned my first nickname, Black Widow. Not for killing, but for weaving strategies that caught what others missed. The first real test came on a supply mission in Africa. A truck blew a tire on gravel. Gunfire erupted out of nowhere. Chaos threatened to consume the operation. Radios hissed, men shouted, panic spread, but I could see the web of possibilities. Every exit, every route, every contingency played out in my mind. I shifted plans, recalculated timing, and the convoy moved to safety. When the dust settled, every operator knew the difference. Cole, a young recruit, approached me, his eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, did you know it was coming?" I saw what could happen, I simply said. That nod he gave me planted a seed of trust that would carry him and others through countless missions. Back at the base, letters went home, carrying the dust of foreign soil, the sting of sea salt, and photographs of uniformed determination. My father never opened a single one. The town, oblivious to my survival and growing reputation, thought I sat behind a desk shuffling papers. Only my mother kept the connection alive, calling every week to check if I was eating, sleeping, and safe. One night, under the low Hamba fluorescent lights, I realized the truth of my work. These threads I wove, these contingencies I built, saved lives. Respect followed quietly, not in applause, but in the lives returned safely, in the trust of men who would never say it aloud. And somewhere in that realization, I understood what my mother had always known. True strength is silent, patient, and relentless. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm, hiding behind calm skies. The hall had been decorated meticulously. White cloths draped the tables, flags hung perfectly, and pies lined up neatly on the side. Guests were chatting lightly, oblivious to the storm about to unfold. I walked in quietly, my steps measured. Every eye that turned toward me felt like he carried a question, a doubt, or a curiosity. My father was there, poised on the stage, exuding the same commanding presence that had marked my childhood. Next to him, standing tall, was Cole, the Navy SEAL my father had publicly claimed as the son he never had. Then it happened. My father cleared his throat. The room fell silent. His voice, cold and precise, cut through the chatter. All she's ever done is disappoint me. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some froze in shock. Others glanced at me, eyes narrowing. And then I heard it. Cole's whisper, soft yet sharp enough for the nearest ears to catch. Black Widow. The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation, richer than any applause. The veteran shifted, sensing the weight of truth. My father's smirk faltered. Confusion, a rare vulnerability, flickered across his eyes. The hall waited, breathless. I walked in quietly, my steps measured. Every eye that turned toward me felt like it carried a question, a doubt, or a curiosity. My father was there, poised on the stage, exuding the same commanding presence that had marked my childhood. Next to him, standing tall, was Cole, the Navy SEAL my father had publicly claimed as the son he never had. Then it happened. My father cleared his throat. The room fell silent. His voice, cold and precise, cut through the chatter. All she's ever done is disappoint me. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some froze in shock. Others glanced at me, eyes narrowing. And then I heard it. Cole's whisper, soft yet sharp enough for the nearest ears to catch. Black Widow. The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation, richer than any applause. The veteran shifted, sensing the weight of truth. My father's smirk faltered. Confusion, a rare vulnerability, flickered across his eyes. The hall waited, breathless. I stepped forward, my shoes echoing against the polished floor. My voice didn't need to rise. It carried on its own, steady, unwavering. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And integrity isn't measured by approval, it's shown in actions. Conversations froze. Heads turned. The silence wrapped around the room like a tangible force. I recounted, calmly and plainly, the story of the convoy in Africa. The mission that nearly collapsed, the lives saved, the strategies woven in shadows that kept men alive. Every detail, every calculated risk, every heartbeat of courage I had invested was now laid bare. Cole stood beside me, silent but supportive. Guests shifted, their perceptions changing mid-breath. Whispers spread. She didn't just file papers, she saved lives. She's the Black Widow. And then, finally, my father spoke, not with authority, not with pride, but with a voice thinner than I had ever heard it. I didn't know. I expected a son. That was foolish. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise, but it was recognition. A word I had waited my whole life to hear. Recognition. The envelope sat on the table. $53 million. It no longer mattered. Tonight, the true fortune was respect, earned and witnessed by everyone present. Guests began to rise, not in applause, but in solemn acknowledgement. Veterans who had once saluted him now looked at me differently. Neighbors, once critical, now measured the weight of truth. Children, wide-eyed, witnessed a legacy being rewritten in a single, undeniable moment. My father slumped slightly in his chair. stripped of the power that had once ruled the room. His lips parted for one word, fragile yet genuine: proud. That word, though small, carried more weight than any ceremony, any title, any inheritance. I stepped outside afterwards, sunlight bathing the hall. The air smelled of late afternoon warmth, of flowers and old wood. I felt no triumph, no revenge, only a quiet, steady peace. For the first time, the story wasn't about who had mocked, dismissed, or underestimated me. It was about who I had become. The daughter, the operative, the strategist, the Black Widow. Unbroken, recognized, and finally free. The hall behind me whispered with the echoes of what had happened, but the truth remained unshakable. Integrity stands firm, courage is silent, and some victories need no applause. They need only to be witnessed. And in that moment, I realized something essential. The story didn't end with my father's collapse. It ended with my own rise. Standing tall in the place my mother had always promised I would fly.